Hey, this is Dale Callahan with Ask Dr. Callahan here to talk about geometry and how do you teach geometry in your homeschool. So one of the things that we will do first here is kind of go back over some of the issues that were covered last time in the last video that's down here in the feed. Because a lot of things that we do when we're teaching geometry are very similar to any other advanced course. So I'll kind of hit those again. If you want to go through back any details, the videos down below, or you can get on our email list and we will provide these to you. But the number one thing is finding the right curriculum. You know, finding the right curriculum that's kind of meeting your goals in terms of college prep or whatever you're looking for. To don't be, not to be released in the sense that you don't have to be controlled by the curriculum. To use your syllabus as a guide, because in any good course you're going to have a syllabus that provides you step by step the steps to take along the way. And to remember, the goal is not perfection. I don't know how many emails and comments we got on that, or especially over time that we get people that are telling us that we get really caught up in perfection, that all the math has to be perfect, everything has to be done right. It doesn't. Your goal isn't to try to be perfect and try to do all the math things correctly. Your goal is to actually learn and understand the concepts. And then sticking to an hour a day. That was the other thing. Well, there was one other thing we covered last time, is not to let your hatred of math or any subject to get in the way. Because a lot of times we as parents will say, I hated math, so obviously you should love it. So not to do those things. But now I want to pick on geometry a little in particular. This is the subject that usually comes. We're usually going to see a scope of for college prep math of algebra, moving to geometry, and then after geometry and algebra to a trig, sometimes called pre-calculus, and then after that called calculus course. And generally those are the courses that you're looking to get through if you're going for a college-based, especially in a STEM type career field, STEM being science, technology, engineering, math. So when we look at geometry in particular, and the book that we use is Harold Jacobs' Geometry, and it's got a different cover now, but it's the same book. It's a third edition of the textbook. When we got into doing geometry, the first thing that we started looking for was a textbook, and several homeschool families had said, hey, will you guys do a video course for Jacob's Geometry? We were thinking, well, maybe there was maybe a different choice for geometry, put it that way. So we bought tons of geometry books, and let me just tell you, boring, just boring. They were the kind of geometry that I remember. I remember being in high school doing high school geometry. I don't even know what I was doing. It was a terrible course. I don't know what the point was. It seemed like all we were doing was drawing shapes and trying to prove something, and I never did really understand why and what we were doing. Terribly boring course. And when I looked at all the textbooks, as we looked at geometry, that's what it looked like. It was just a whole bunch of shapes and drawings and things, and like, what's the point of this? Who cares? So when we started going through, we were buying the books, and I was quickly reminded why I hated geometry. Don't tell anybody that, but I hated geometry. And so, but Harold Jacobs was different. His book is very, very real world. As I look through his book here, he's got geometries and shapes of a zebra, geometry and shapes of when you're going around a swing, of a rowing boats, of houses. Almost every single thing in his textbook is real world. As a matter of fact, you kind of have to work hard just to get the triangles and the diagrams in his textbook. Everything in here applies to everything from sciences to architecture to even the movement of the planets. But because that's what it is. That's what geometry is. It's a relationships of the shapes and understanding of those things. So we went with Harold Jacobs' Geometry, obviously. Not because people were necessarily asking for it, but because once we realized it, we realized after our research that the reason they were recommending it was because they were recommending us to do a course on it was because they had done the research. They knew what we had discovered, is that it was the best textbook out there to make geometry reachable. So as you look at doing geometry, here's some of the many questions. Well, I'll just hit you with a couple of the questions we get. And let me turn here to the back of the book. If you've ever done geometry, or you remember anything about geometry, you remember things about theorems and proofs, and those kind of words that probably might make some of you break out in hives. Postulate's another one. Things like the square of the hypotenuse of a right triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. Some of you might recognize what that one is. That's the Pythagorean theorem. But then there's the betweenness theorem. If A, B, C, then AB plus BC equals AC. There's all these theorems. As a matter of fact, as I'm looking in the back of Harold Jacobs' book, their listing of theorems goes on for quite a few little pages here. Let's see, there's 90 theorems in his textbook, which is typical for geometry. Now, why am I bringing that up to talk about theorems? No. One of the questions that we get a lot of times is, should my student memorize all these theorems? No, please don't. There's some that they're going to do. There's some that they're going to memorize because they do it all over again. But you're not needing to memorize theorems. You need to understand what they're doing. We don't walk around memorizing and quoting theorems. The point here is to get familiar with what is in the textbook and to think logically. A lot of what's going on in geometry is just logical thinking. So as one of the hints that we always give parents is, he does an excellent job, because these are working problems you do need to, and here in the back of the book you see there's just a list of the theorems and everything. You can just kind of turn back and say, oh yeah, that was in chapter this. It's a great resource, because we get caught up in these kind of things when we're working problems. And related to that, you guys might find this wonderful. This is the geometry of candy bars. So thought y'all might find that the volume of a prism, and talking about candy bars. That's something that's probably relevant to all of us. When we're doing these problems, what we would recommend is even a student uses open book. They keep the book open. They look things up, because you're trying to just understand. So you don't have to memorize things here. The other thing about geometry, besides the fact you don't have to memorize it, is, or one other thing, is it's not that hard of a course, especially through this. It's got proofs, and it's got logical thinking and those kind of things we want in a geometry course. But you're not just going to have to beat yourself up in terms of doing massive amounts of complex proofs that kind of go nowhere. Harold Jacobs tries to walk you through the proof, if I'm doing geometry, that's what I want to do. But thinking logically is so critical. Think about our society today. We see arguments from politicians and news shows, and a lot of times their arguments are illogical. Literally, they're illogical. They use poor logic, trying to make some argument. Now, I guess most of the country doesn't notice that they're using poor logic or care that they're using poor logic, but it's in the study of geometry that we start dealing with the subject of logic, and a very important subject. Just how do you get from point A to point Z? How do you just step by step prove something without assuming too much? A very important concept that we need just in critical thinking. And related to that critical thinking, that's one of the biggest questions I get from or a request that we get from corporate leaders when they're trying to hire people. I'll ask them, I was meeting with a CIO of a bank the other day, and I said, what's the number one thing that you need? And he said, it's critical thinking. We just need people who can critically think through problems. And this is a good place to get started to do that. As a matter of fact, that's really all math is. It's just a lot of critical thinking. So a third thing here is, though, you need to treat geometry as an extended nature study. A lot of us have done nature studies, and we have the luxury in a homeschool environment to just go out and do nature studies. I remember when we started homeschooling, and our younger daughter was in, I guess she was in 6th grade at the time. She had this big fat nature study book, and she just went outside and just absorbed nature. And she still just knows a massive amount of things about the natural world around us because of that one thing, that interest in nature. Geometry is just an extended nature study. Now, it even goes beyond nature. It actually goes into anything that's structural, even anything man-made. Because what you're looking for are spatial relationships. And so one of the things that I would encourage, we do encourage parents to do, is a student's going to kind of look at these things, and because Harold in his textbook has so many relations to the real world and talks about real world problems all the time. Like here's one talking about how the windshield wipers move and the geometrical pattern as I'm looking through this. That's just that's embedded in what he's doing, so it helps you think about that. And so as you are out, you try to encourage your student to think about it. You can look at the shape of a building. You can look at a leaf. If you've ever looked at a leaf, you see patterns of the leaf. Some leaves have triangular patterns, some have rectangular patterns. In snowflakes, everything has all these geometrical patterns and geometrical relationships. Even things we build, whether it's an automobile or a building or a roof line or anything like that, there's so much geometry embedded into it. As a matter of fact, if you don't think through the geometry, you have a pretty poor design. And so teaching your kids just to think and watch and look and see what the geometrical patterns are. It's even a very practical kind of course, because some of the things that you're doing in these courses is thinking about roof pitches, thinking about how do you measure area, how do you measure volume, how do you measure some of these things that we measure, we take for granted that we know how to do all of the time, but it goes so far beyond that in the sense of we can start to look at things and make relationships there. So again, 3 things there and that are specific to geometry is you don't have to memorize things. There's a lot of things that you could memorize. I would recommend not memorizing. I think you actually lose the value by by trying to memorize. And I'm going to throw this in there too. As you move in education, and I mean in general education, we're not trying to make people experts in just memory of everything. We are trying to teach our kids to think, to learn, to have a love for learning, and to understand how to go and get information. So the fact that I can Google something and I can go find something on the internet is a very powerful skill, the knowing how to research something, knowing how to get answers to things. But knowing the concept and knowing, oh, that was a geometry concept, let me go back to the geometry book, let me go back to that book and find it. That's that understanding that you need is I don't have to remember it, I know where it is, I know how to find it. So the memorization is just not an issue here. The second thing is just thinking of this as an extended nature study. Just look for geometry and all the nature. It's not again, it's not that hard of a course, especially through this. One of the common support questions we get is students overthink geometry. They try to make it more complicated than it is. The Harold Jacobs and the way he does problems, like he's got the windshield wiper problem here in front of me, and he asked a question. One type of windshield wiper has 2 blades that remain parallel as they move back and forth, which, pay attention to that in your car. Does yours do that? Do they really remain parallel? And he says, so that's a type of windshield wiper. And so then problems 5 through 10 are asking questions about that subject. So, and that's how he does. He just kind of takes you one piece at a time to understand and unpack what's in that. What does that mean, and how do you make conclusions from that? So he's got this embedded method of walking you through problems, walking you through how to think about things, and walking you through proofs. So as you see that, and capture it back, and capture it back in terms of looking at, when I say nature, or maybe I should even say looking at the real world. So hopefully that helps, gives you some things to think about in geometry. Next time we're going to be talking about doing some things that are related to other upper level algebra 2 and trig and calculus.